And welcome back to this next session on the Desire Fulfillment series, which we have started before. So really happy to have another opportunity to speak to Radhika Shah-Groovan. She has been in the world of yoga for many, many years, guided and is guiding her students all over the world. And today we would like to dive again deeper into the aspects of desires. Today was a focus on what happens if desires are not fulfilled, frustration. And so welcome, Radhika ji, to this session. So let's start with the question of who is actually the I that wants fulfillment, and can desire be fulfilled without strengthening our ego?
Those of you who know the yogic anatomy of life, which is this amazing diagram which sums up all of life very beautifully, where we have this part in us which is pure consciousness, individual consciousness, then comes the unconscious mind, then the conscious mind. It's like layers, and then comes the breathing body, and finally our physical body. So these are the different aspects of us. And this I that we're talking about is the conscious mind. And in modern psychology, in modern terminology, we also say ego to it. But it is really a whole bunch of different identities put together. And so, an umbrella term that is used in yoga and in Indian spiritual traditions is the word ahankara. And in the more modern approach to that, explaining that would be the conscious mind, because the word ego is loaded. It has many other meanings, like, you're egotistical or your ego trip. And it has many different meanings also within different schools of psychology. So it's best to use the term conscious mind in this case. This conscious mind wants to feel fulfilled, but it's the entire mind in reality. But it seems to be the conscious mind which seeks this fulfillment and at least is able to communicate it with the external world. As for strengthening ego or not strengthening ego, well, this is a matter of awareness, of mastery. If you have self knowledge and if you are able to see yourself clearly, if you know yourself, then you will make sure that you don't have this coloring, arrogance, pride, which comes when desires are fulfilled. For most of us, when desires are fulfilled, we acquire this coloring, arrogance, pride, or confidence, all these. And so it is difficult to avoid this coloring, and then the ego gets strengthened. So the only solution to that is, of course, self-awareness.
Yeah, thanks for pointing this out. You have mentioned that also before, that self-awareness is really very important. What are we actually doing with those unfulfilled desires, and why do desires remain unfulfilled for a lot of people?
It's a good question. Why do so many people feel unfulfilled? As you can see, that most of the desires that we have, if you want to be on the top of your class, there's only one place there. There's only one position at the top. If you want to be the richest person in your country, then there's also only one position right at the top. And so it's a kind of a pyramid. And so when we have desires to be successful, whatever the area may be, whether it is being wealthy or whether it's being successful in a career or whatever it may be, there is a competition for that position. And so it is natural that a lot of people will fail and will remain unfulfilled or will feel unfulfilled. And so that is one reason. The other is also the unsupportive environment. When everybody is competing for a position, say you want to be the head of a company, then there's only one position right at the top of that company. And there are maybe 4 or 5 managers competing for that one position. So this obviously they're not going to support you if they want the position themselves. And in other ways, also the environment can be unsupportive. So desires will remain unfulfilled. Then there is the aspect of the contradiction that we face between what we think we want and what we really want. There's a mismatch there. So our conscious mind has accepted suggestions from the external world. You should be a doctor. You should gather wealth. You should be successful in life. And even if you don't want to do all that, you don't want to be a doctor, you don't want to collect money, you don't want to be super successful, maybe you want to lead a simple life. Maybe you are content, you have enough, you want to write poetry or, or meditate, for example, but you feel the external environment is not supporting that. And there comes a kind of a contradiction or a conflict between this external pressure that you face very often also from parents and what you truly deeply feel the desire to do. And so there is also that kind of conflict. And when there's a conflict in the mind, it's a kind of a war, there's no stability, there's no balance. So that also is not the best way to fulfill desires, especially when you don't even know what your true desire is. So these are some of the reasons why we are so conflicted and often unfulfilled.
Yet, it is said that one learns more from failure than success. Do you agree with
Well,
that?
I just explained that the chances are that there are more people who are unsuccessful than the people who are successful. And if everybody would learn from failure, then we would definitely see more successful people or more content people, people who are just happy where they are. But that is not the case. So while there is this idea going around, oh, I learned more from my failure than from my success, it may be true. But to only experience failure or have a lot of failures and not enough success in life is extremely frustrating, creates a lot of baggage, burden, and makes you feel small and insignificant. For example, in education, when we speak of young children, when they are trained in educative training programs, a lot of emphasis is placed on the fact that children should also experience small successes. And with these small successes, they gradually move forward. So, if the idea were true that failure, one learns more from failure, then that would not work when we raise our children either. In schools, the idea would also not work. We should make things so tough for the children that they fail all the time. On the other hand, it's true that when children fall, when they're learning, toddlers, for example, they fall and they pick themselves up. What one does learn, if one is really aware and focused, that one should continue their efforts and not lose heart too easily. So that is definitely something one can learn from failure. But all in all, I would say that we need both. We need some successes in life, else our lives become extremely hard to bear, full of frustration, anger, misery. And that's when people who are disappointed feel the need for another approach to life.
Let's take it from a more wider perspective. And that's also with the following question. Is there a relationship between birth and
Well, most
desire?
certainly. In one of our previous sessions, we had briefly mentioned that birth, the kind of birth we have now, is related to samskaras, the impressions in the mind. And these impressions in the mind, these desires essentially bring us here to this plane. And whatever we have in this plane, the kind of birth you have, the kind of experiences you have, the lifespan you have, is directly related to our desires, what we need to live out in this lifetime. And that is, again, beautifully explained in the Mandukya Upanishad. I will provide a link for the overview of this amazing Upanishad. It's a very short Upanishad with only 12 verses, but it is very enlightening. If anybody is looking for a really good book on it, then I strongly recommend the book by Swami Rama. And the book is called Enlightenment Without God. It is a commentary on the Mandukya Upanishad. It explains that the hidden comes forward. So you are driven to this birth by these samskaras which are hidden. It's not like we all are very keen on being born, but we are pulled down by our samskaras, by these desires, which have remained unfulfilled in previous births. And they bring us to this plane, and they have to be lived out in some form or the other, or you have to learn to renounce them internally or externally, whichever seems more more practical or easier. And when this hidden comes forward, you experience this world. So that is the process of birth and rebirth, actually. And it's a fascinating topic. There's also a good explanation, good amount of explanation in my book on the Yoga Sutras. But definitely the book by Swami Rama, Enlightenment Without God, is a masterpiece.
Thanks for pointing this out. And as usual, we are discovering very, very deep topics during the discussion and talking about birth and talking about death. So, what happens to desires as death approaches?
Well, if you have led a good life means a life in which you were able to live out your samskaras or desires in a healthy and sustainable manner, then you will be able to pass into the next birth or have a safe passage across, a transition to the next plane of consciousness. I won't say with ease, but definitely without a lot of suffering, without a lot of fear and anxiety, because you will feel content. You led a good life and you made the best of your life. But if you haven't been able to do that, for whatever reason, maybe circumstances were unsupportive, or you were afraid, anxiety and fear blocked you. You were unable to be yourself. You were busily trying to fulfill the expectations or the desires of your parents or your environment, your surroundings, your family, rather than your own desires. And if that is the case, then in the last moments, in the last months or weeks, you will experience terrible regrets. The mind field comes forward and you feel your life was wasted. And that is very unfortunate because when you die, you will die dissatisfied, unhappy, which means, of course, that rebirth is definitely necessary in order to live out those very desires that you were unable to live out. And this can mean many things. I mean, on one side, it can be a good thing that you have that opportunity again and again repeatedly. It's a very compassionate way of the divine helping us to come back to this plane of consciousness again and again until you get it right. And if that's the case, then so be it. You must return. However, if the death is full of regrets and a lot of internal contradictions, the mind at war with itself, then you will have a difficult transition, which may lead to also difficult birth and once again, um, a lifespan with perhaps with troubles. So we need to learn how to deal or manage our desires to fulfill them in a way that's sustainable, that's manageable, and that we do not fuel more desires. So, in our tradition, the Sri Vidya tradition of the highest form of Tantra, which is Samaya, this is what we aspire, a conscious death without regrets. And when you can consciously leave this body, you have opportunities to live out many things consciously, even on subtler planes of consciousness.
Thank you so much. I like the sentence that you mentioned, conscious death without regrets. I think that's a good motivation, I think, also for me and hopefully also for many others who will watch this and who will read also further on to really go into this on a deeper level. Thanks a lot for sharing this in this other part of the sessions on desire fulfillment. As you mentioned, there is a link down under the description of the Mundakya Upanishad. So have a look. There's also a summary of the book that was mentioned by you. So go into this. And also, as I've always said, if you have questions, please put them in the comments and Radhikaji will be very happy to answer all your questions that you have. Looking forward to see you soon. And thanks again for this session. Bye-bye.